And a bit of housekeeping first. If you require the ASL interpreter, please pin the ASL interpreter. If you find the ASL interpreter's box where you can see that interpreter, you can click a little, if you hover your mouse over it, you can click a little thing that looks like a push pin, and that way you can see the interpreter and the presentation at the same time, just so you don't lose that. Again, starting over, Chiodo is with DeafLink. It's an organization out of Texas that recently presented to the Equal Access Committee on this topic of taking 911 calls or more generally communicating with people who are deaf. And I found it very enlightening, very informative, and a good presentation for one of our lunch and learns. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Kay, and just let me know when I need to change slides.
Thank you very much for handling the slides. And thank you all for letting me interrupt your lunch. I appreciate it. And first of all, I want to explain that we work with just the whole disability population when we're talking about communication. When we're talking about people who are deaf that rely on sign language, people that are deaf blind, people who are blind and maybe require, Braille. And this is something, as I get to the lower part of the slides here, I'll go in more depth. So I wanted to touch on the population, and I tried to change my presentation a little more directed toward 911. And I want you to know I am doing lots of research on 911 and how you work. Let me tell you how much I know. About this much. I can sign 911. That's about it. What you do is, to me, is very complicated, but it's very, very important to every segment of our population. And so that's why I'm here today to talk about some of the challenges that you may have when communication isn't clear and effective. And I use the words clear and effective because those are the words used in the ADA in providing equal access to services for the public. So one of the things I'd like to do real quick is introduce one of my co-workers, and his name is Yinter Tu. So Yinter, can you do something so we can see you?
Hello. Y'all can see me? Hello. Hi, Kay. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with you guys. It's a really great honor to be involved. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer anything that comes to your mind.
Awesome. And that way you will have the opportunity to not just ask me questions, but also to ask Yinter. And Yinter is deaf. He was born deaf, and his first language is ASL. And actually his first language was, I'll let him explain that later, but he was born deaf. And it's interesting the challenges that the deaf population, deaf-blind face when it comes to 911. And I really want to share that with y'all and encourage you to reach out to your disability community and get feedback from them. Okay, next slide. One of the things that I'm always asked is, well, they'll come up and they'll tap me. What is the appropriate way to address Yinter if I'm saying he's, he's deaf? And that shows respect, and that's how they identify. We hear sometimes deaf mute, hearing impaired, he's deaf. And if I was wrong, he would speak up right now, trust me. And if you're not sure about someone and their disability, if you're referring to their disability in a conversation and they're there to educate you about that, ask them, what do they prefer? How do they prefer to address their disability? I have someone who works with us, with Yinter and I, who is older. He's a lot older than me, so that makes him older. He's hard of hearing, and he's blind, and he prefers to be referred to as blind and hearing impaired. He grew up with that word. That's what he's comfortable with. But yet, for other people, it can be an insult. So let's go to the next slide. And one of the things I want to encourage, if y'all have a question, go ahead, raise your hand. Please, please don't wait to the end of the presentation. Interrupt me if that's possible. And ask your question. I don't want you to hold it to the end. You might forget if you're like me. But please feel comfortable asking anything. It doesn't matter. Yenter is comfortable with that. We've been asked questions about how to deaf drive, all these different things. We want you to feel comfortable. That's why we're here today. We didn't get the lunch part, but we're here to learn as well. We want to learn what your questions are and how we can help you understand. I don't know how many of you know this, but did you know that American Sign Language, even though it's called American, it has no roots in English? And this is really important to y'all, because when you get a text message from someone and it's not clear and effective communication, that's going to be a challenge. And I'm sure many of you have already had these challenges. But I want you to know that American Sign Language has no roots in English. It's actually, you can tell, I can actually sign better than I can talk, is one of the third most taught foreign languages in our colleges today. You notice I said foreign. It is a foreign language. This ASL is the same sign language that's being used by deaf in Haiti. We worked with Doctors Without Borders during a cholera outbreak there, and the doctors were going, they're using ASL. Well, we just kind of labeled it that here. It has, this is my big word, Trevor, to our interpreter. It has no orthography, which means writing system. ASL, as with other sign languages, are one of the few languages in the world that has no writing system behind it. It's a visual, gestural language that includes expression, body language, and it's interesting because people will say, well, Kate, you know, I learned my ABCs. Yay, you're close enough to, you know, getting certified. We almost would hire you. But when you use your ABCs to spell a word other than a name, let's say, for instance, the word ambulance, which we're going to talk about as we go through this. Ambulance is a sign. That's the lights, when the lights are turning. And so, but to fingerspell the word ambulance, for people who rely on sign language, that's one of those big hearing people words. You may have used my ABCs, but I have no idea what that word means. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Okay, next slide. When doing some research about 911, I read a lot about TTYs. And they would say TTY/TTD. Actually, it's an acronym for the same piece of equipment. I think the deaf community tend to use TTY. I've seen that more often. But let me explain something. And now, actually, it's available in English and Spanish. Oh, I don't know if you know that, but I want to show you how this works. I'm looking to my slides. Let's go to the next slide. It says how and who uses a TTY. Well, this picture shows a gentleman who has either speech or is deaf or hard of hearing. He's using this and it's directly plugged in. He doesn't have a phone on it. It's not, a lot of people used to put the phone on those little coupling things there and be able to use it without having a direct plug into their TTY. But obviously this one is directly plugged in. He calls 711, which is a relay operator. And she in turn will explain to the lady who picks up the phone, or whoever it might be, the hearing person that they're calling, and tell her, you know, you hear GA, go ahead, this type thing. In the 911 centers, I've learned that y'all are to accept a TTY call directly. You don't go through an operator. That call comes directly to you. If I'm wrong, you know, Daryl, somebody in there needs to say, nope, Kate, that's not how it works. So
that is correct.
so once that call comes to y'all and you've got your TTY there, here's one of the most important things that the general population, hearing population, doesn't understand. Years and years ago, different entities would give free TTYs to the deaf community. They would try to hawk them, go to a pawn shop and pawn them and get, you know, a few dollars for them, or sell them to their employer who is required to have one. You know, why is that? Because to use a TTY and call 911 through a TTY, what does it require? Your ability to read and write English, right? Well, for a large segment of the deaf population, that, well, those that depend on ASL, that's not going to happen. And I get the question, and feel free to ask me these things. I've had people say, well, don't the deaf go to school? Yes, they do. Ginter is a good example. He has a degree. And, you know, other deaf, they may have just graduated, you know, high school. But here's the thing. Under state and federal law, it's required to have an interpreter in each one of those classrooms. Why? So they have access. That interpreter in that classroom is not interpreting your English words on their hands. They're interpreting ASL. So it is such a conceptual language. I mean, it's easy if I show you the sign for book. Book. It's like opening a book. Book. B-O-O-K. Book. Now, you can teach, and a lot of deaf have, you know, I think the stats are saying anywhere from 3rd to 4th grade reading level of English. Why? Because it's not their language. I mean, it's the same thing for someone who is born deaf blind. Using Braille is how they communicate. You don't look and say, well, why didn't they learn to read English? Because it's not their language. And that's why it's under the ADA as a disability. So, and if this isn't coming off clear, if I'm not explaining this well, please let me know. Anyway, when that call comes in, let's say, suppose someone deaf, and this has happened many years before Relay, and we've been working in this industry. Well, I grew up with deaf and deafblind. So I was around when the first TTY came out, and it was given to, you know, deaf. So if I'm having to call 911, but I don't know your language, it's going to be a challenge on there. When the old TTYs used to have paper tapes that printed out the conversation, and everything was in caps that was from the caller, and then ours was in the just lower text print. Lower caps print. I used to put that tape down in front of me and look at it and sign the words they were trying to write, and watching my hands to see if I could figure out what they were saying to me. So it can be quite the challenge. And if any of y'all have had that experience, let me know. Next slide, please. Now, this is awesome. These are the new video phones that this one was, I think it's one of the newest ones, right? Right, Enter, that's out. It's interesting because deaf don't have to pay for these. These are given to them. There are relay companies that are paid under the FCC to provide equal access to phone calls for people who are deaf. And so most deaf will have these in their home. It costs them nothing. And these companies that are giving them out, they get paid so much a minute each time they're making a call. Here again is one of the challenges. And y'all will have to educate me. This is a lunch and learn, and it's going to go both ways. I did read where the FCC said, and also an ADA representative said, calls to 911 can't be through a third party. It doesn't comply with their requirements. Well, this, I'm sure they make an exception for this, I'm guessing, because this is the only way a person who's deaf that relies on ASL is able to call you. And what they do is they click on, and if you go to the next slide, I think I have one that shows this better. Over here with the lady who's got a computer in front of her with a camera on it, she can see herself. One of the pictures is herself, but the other is an interpreter. And I don't know how many of you know how this works, but what she's doing, she's signing to that interpreter. You know, if she needed to call 911, she'd say, I need to call 911. And they would immediately do that. And once they connected with you, everything she's signing to that interpreter on the screen, they have a headset on and they're voicing to you. The deaf person may say, shh, don't tell them I'm deaf. I don't know why they do that, because that's really important. Not all deaf will do that, but some will do that. Yinter, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And some have told me it's because I don't want them to know I'm deaf because they'll think I'm, you know, I'm stupid or I'm this and that. And so I just want it private. So she's calling let's say if she's calling 911, that operator's talking to you as if she's her. Because she was told not to say, this is operator 2200, you have a deaf caller, go ahead. And just talk as if you're talking to that person. I don't know how many of you have had a relay call, but a lot of deaf who are doing that. And this is one of the important things. I know I have it on a slide, but I'm going to go ahead and say this now, is that when they're calling you through relay or through text, a lot of times the deaf that depend on ASL are going to ask you, and trust me, we know this for a fact. They're going to ask you, you know, this has happened, and I need, tell the police, you know, I need an interpreter to bring with them, to bring an interpreter. So you can tell me if one of you have had that happen to you. And the reason why is that Yinter and I both can't even start to count how many times deaf have told us, and we've done this here with outreach in our deaf community with Bear Metro 911. We brought in groups from the deaf community to discuss this. Yes, I told the 911 person, need interpreter, bring. Why? Because the policeman shows up, don't laugh, because this is a fact. Policeman shows up and says, and so who does he talk to? The hearing person. Who goes to jail if there's a problem? The deaf person. That happens probably, we hear about it, Yinter, I don't know what, every couple of weeks we hear stories about this. So and if you have questions about that, let me know. The next picture is, let's say that I know the 911 centers aren't open to the public. So let's just say a deaf person walks into a doctor's office or ER, and it's immediate, they need to talk immediately now to someone. They can bring up on their iPad, even on their phones or their computers, a live interpreter. This is paid for by the facility it's taking place in. That's called VRI, Video Remote Interpreting. The other is Video Relay Services that the FCC pays for. This one here, where on the iPad, the person that's communicating with that deaf person, their facility, or they are paying for that. If I've totally confused you, again, let me know. So let's go to the next slide. And before we play this, Yenter, did you have anything you wanted to add to anything I've said so far?
Yes, I do want to explain some of my experience, specifically regarding calling 911 and trying to get somebody to arrive on scene. And the reason is because when they get there, they typically focus on the hearing person or the other person, and they're not paying attention to the deaf person. And that's something they should keep in the back of their mind. They should really try to understand the deaf community, and their needs were frequently ignored. And so, maybe the hearing person has a different story and they twist what happened. The cops are going to believe the hearing person because I'm not provided accessibility to in my own language. And that was just a little thing I wanted to let you guys know about.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that 911, I know that you don't have the authority to force the police or the fire department. If you go there, you take an interpreter with you. But one of the things, hopefully, we can educate the police and the fire departments, all of these, about having that access on their phone, getting their department to have a contract with a relay provider that when they're there, they can just click on their phone or their laptop, because they have laptops in their cars, and have access to bring up that interpreter and connect immediately. So, and this next video, it's basically has to do with people police officers, doctors in general, from the hearing community, that just have not learned. They think, well, you know what? They're going to read my lips. This is a short video about reading lips. Can you go ahead, Daryl? Okay, I'm not even hearing it. Daryl, or something?
Yeah,
Oh.
I probably need to unmute for you to be able to hear it. Let me start it over.
And it's a little jerky because we're playing this over through the internet.
So when I was really young, probably kindergarten or first grade, I have a much older brother.
Baby,
Okay.
come on.
So when
There
I
we
was
go.
really young, probably kindergarten or first grade, I have a much older brother. And we'd go out to recess, and there was this older guy, he might have been in like 5th or 6th grade, that always used to pick on us. And I didn't really know what to do about it.
Today we went to a high school, and I was posing for a picture with all of my girlfriends, and all of a sudden one of them reached over.
Okay.
So when I was really young,
Yeah, you don't have to start it over, Daryl. That's fine. I think it's going to be challenging. If someone wants a copy of this PowerPoint, they can watch it. What basically this is showing is that, and let me back up a little bit. I do know people who were born deaf that are fairly good at reading lips. We used to have a lady from Austin. She's retired now, and she went deaf at 2. So at 2, most kids already have language. So she was not prelingually deaf. So as her parents really, they trained her. She went to speech pathologist. She, touched the throat, on the feather, all this stuff to really encourage her voice. And to hear her talk, you would never know she was totally, totally deaf. We used her for FBI surveillance tapes. And it was interesting because she was pretty blunt. I remember one time the FBI person that was working with her said, well, what are they saying now? What are they saying now? And she said, I have no clue. It's the back of their head. And honestly, if they don't have let's say at least a concept of what the subject matter is, it's very difficult. And one of the things that she said, that since she could talk clearly, but she was totally deaf, doctors and hospitals would refuse to give her interpreters. But if someone, and this is what this video is showing, with the mustache, with, some people have accents, some people, it's very difficult to lip read. And if we go to the next slide, whoops, I have a slide out of order somewhere. Okay, anyway, if one of the things that we stress about having people read lips, and we get this a lot from law enforcement. Well, I got right up close and I did this so they would understand me. If you went home tonight and turned the volume off your TV, how much lip reading are you going to do? Now, I'm not talking about sports or something where you can see the coach going. You notice, Daryl, I didn't say the word. I just mouthed it. You can get some of the dirty words off someone's lips. I'm talking about put it on the news channel. Chances are, and remember, you read and write this language every day. You're not going to be able to lip read enough that is going to be clear and effective. Most likely, you're not going to lip read anything at all. So, since I have a slide out of order, we'll get to it in a minute. And I'm terrible with PowerPoint, so I apologize. Let me talk about CapTel voiceover phones. This is also in your 911 training, so I'm sure you're familiar with these. A lot of people at different businesses that are open to the public, like doctors' offices, they may have one of these. And they say, oh, we had a deaf person in here, and we gave them access and put this in front of them, but they refused to use it. This has nothing to do with interpreters. This has to do, if you're still able to voice for yourself, you may want to be able to use that. But the caller, the person you've called, what their response is being typed back by an operator in the middle who's typing. Now, this is different with your TTY because this is a direct call to you. And with your voice over phones, I'm assuming, because there's no way you could do that. With voice over phones, if the caller is using this, there's a middle person who's typing everything, you're responding to them. The person can still talk for themselves, but they cannot hear. So that is a voice carryover phone. Deaf that rely on sign language do not use these. Next slide, please, Daryl. This is our most underserved population. We serve this population in hospitals. This is not something we do through video. This requires an on-site interpreter to show up. Now, we're just wanting you to know what these different disabilities require. You're not going to have, now don't get me wrong, you could have a deaf-blind person actually call you using a Braille connected to their phone, a Braille reader. So this is not out of the realm of something you would deal with. And people say, well, aren't they, they were born deaf-blind, so they're signing, so I can reply with them English. And no. You can reply to them if they can read Braille, yes. But when someone is actually with them, like in a hospital or a police officer, and this is a story that really bothers me. A deaf-blind lady called 911, got an officer to show up at their house. She was being abused. It was really interesting because she was being abused by the neighbor who thought that she should not have kids there because she was deafblind. And it was a very sad story because the officer came and arrested the deafblind lady, actually put her into a state hospital, and put her kids into the system. You know, I have friends, one in particular, Kim Powers, that lives in Austin, who is deafblind. She's raised 3 boys, and she's an excellent mom. But lack of education about this population can be very detrimental to them. It took her being able to finally, because she had no communication until they brought in a tactile signer when she was ill in the state hospital. And that tactile signer was requested, and they can advocate, brought in an advocate for her. But it took her almost 2 years to get her children back. So understanding that, no, being deafblind does not mean they have a caretaker at home. Some do. But there are deafblind that raise kids, have jobs, and are fantastic. And actually, I know many who can run circles around me on intelligence. So this is another population. If you have questions, reach out to us. Yenter, myself, will be happy to answer any questions you have. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is actually just showing you some of the devices that are available. Larry Johnson, who's blind, that works with us, he takes notes. He makes fun of me because when I should be taking notes, I just draw pictures. They are able to get alerts, accessible alerts. If there's a tornado in their area, their refresh braille reader can vibrate, or they get notice on their phone and they tap on it and it either comes up voice. If they're deaf blind, it raises the dots on their braille readers and gives them access to emergency information that their hearing neighbors get. And this is available in areas that have one of our services, which is accessible hazard alert, and we'll get into that. Next slide. I'm always surprised what slide's coming up because, again, I had them out of order. I want to bring this up because this is something, I'm not going to quote Helen Keller correctly, and I'm sure most of all of y'all know who Helen Keller is. I will stop signing and just talk. My interpreter hates that I do that. I'm sorry. Helen Keller, as you know, was deafblind. And one of her most famous quotes, and I'm not saying it exactly right, was that being blind separates you from things. But people can describe that to you and keep you in the loop. Being deaf separates you from people. When you're deaf, generally people will not approach you if they don't already know you, hearing people. And it's been, over the years, I've explained to many, many of my deaf friends, oh, you know, the hearing person's snobby. No, they feel awkward. They don't know how to communicate with you. 99% of them are in awe of your language. It's beautiful. They stare at you, not because they're making fun of you, because it's fascinating. But this is true. The deaf community is separated because of those barriers to communication and to education. The same thing with 911. I encourage you on at every point, get to know your disability community, reach out to them. Next slide, please, Daryl. Okay. This is my little spin on this. And again, Daryl, you're not shy, so you'll tell me, Kay, you're wrong. This first was a public service announcement made by the School for the Deaf here in Texas. And you notice there's a deaf person signing, and it gives examples. And there's a video later, but it's not going to play. They give examples in this when she says, you know, text if you can, call if you can't. It's a little bit unfair, in my personal opinion, that you as 911 operators who are critical. I mean, you are just critical part of society for everybody. You're our link to services when we have an emergency. But they're not telling you in this video, and they're not really, they've got captioning. That's great. And that's for those who need them. And it's also voiced. But the thing is, it's being signed. It's being signed to the deaf community to text you. No one ever told you that you're going to have texts from people who don't know your language. So that's interesting. I pulled a clip from one. This is Vermont's 911 video they had. And again, she's saying, if you need, the fire department or an ambulance. This video is signing these things. But it's being voiced. So people are going to be shocked when those words, ambulance, now fire, the sign for it, but then you will have deaf who need to contact you that aren't going to be able to spell F-I-R-E. And I know that's a simple word, but remember, it's not their language. Yinter, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Yes. So I also wanted to let you know that specifically TTY and the video phone. Now for TTY, you have to be careful because some deaf-blind can type. And they use the TTY and they haven't gotten rid of that yet. But the video phone, that's a modern technology. I know many 911 operators don't accept in sign language, but the deaf need to use the video phone because, texting in English, maybe there are misunderstandings. So it's crucial to have that access with the video phone so that they're comfortable speaking in their own language. And that was just something that's, helpful for y'all to know.
And I want to add that here with Bear Metro 911, we're working with a lady named Zelina, and she asked us, well, she listened to what we had to say, and she goes, well, that sounds, So what we started was a pastry prizes and tours. We were actually bribing to get the deaf community to come in, but we brought in groups of 30, 35, maybe close to 40, I can't remember, a few times for them to be able to speak up and educate 911 in our area. And one of the things she said, well, you said that they really didn't understand a lot of the words. So we had a group there that was about 45. You were there during this one, but she put up on the screen one of the questions that 911 may ask. And it was something like, what are your cross streets? And so the interpreter signed. How many of you in the room read that sentence and understand? And I think maybe 2 hands went up. And the first lady says, no. If it's my emergency that happened, I'm not going to cross the street. I'm going to stay my side. Well, the second lady, her hand went down. But you have to remember, this is not their language. So for someone to see that I might be able to read that word, but I'm not going to comprehend it, because the word cross and street, it's cross a street. But the concept of cross streets, if you're signing it street and then there's intersection, remember, that's a visual language. That's like the word present. I will present today. Maybe Daryl will give me a present. Maybe they're too close. The concepts are off. Our language is very difficult to learn. But if you can't hear it and have never heard it, no, that is a challenge beyond what hearing people understand. Yenter, do you agree with that?
Yes, and another example, the word incident. The sign for that is happened. Deaf people aren't going to understand the English word incident. Also, location. That's another word that we would sign, where are you? You are where now? And so those are a couple things that, they just wouldn't understand the concept behind the English word.
Right. And if we can go to the next slide, Daryl. And Daryl, how am I doing on time? Am I in trouble yet?
We got about 15 minutes, but we can go over if we need to.
Oh, no, I'm going to wrap it real quick.
Okay.
I paused a video here and circled, and Ginter, again, I want your 2 cents. And you notice he had the interpreter actually signed 2 cents. Did you sign 2 cents or did you say your opinion?
That you're throwing your opinion.
Okay, because 2 cents is a hearing, it's a hearing idiom. It's like using the term when a new interpreter signs, oh, well, I'll tell you that story later. It's a horse of another color. And the deaf person says, well, what color is their horse? Why are they talking about their horse now? So a lot of times interpreters will just kind of, yeah, that was just an added, sorry. But the word emergency, the sign for emergency, if you look at the interpreter signing emergency, emergency. Signed ambulance. If you look at the interpreter, ambulance. And I don't know if y'all can see the interpreter. Can you see the interpreter? Daryl, am I talking off?
Yes, they should be able to. If you need to see the interpreter and can't see them right now, you can go to the participant panel and pin.
I'll just sign it again. I'm sorry, that's why I was asking. Emergency. Those are E's. E's. Emergency. Ambulance. Those are the lights. They're not going to even do skateboard. And let me tell you, and location. That's a hearing person word. Same thing for accident, because it could be they got hurt. They got hurt. I circled the address because if you were to say, can you tell me, and you said, where it happened, they may say on the street. I mean, because sign language is literal. It's literal. It's literal. It's blunt. It's to the point. You didn't say name of the street. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge depending on the deaf caller that you have. So again, I circled injured person. No. What that is a sign for hurt and a body. It's the hurt person. Remember, it's a concept language that I'm adding your words to. So let's go to the next slide. I'm not going to be able to play this, but this is actually a deaf lady calling 911. This video is made, and if you do get a copy of this presentation, you can look at it. It shows when she said, "Is your husband conscious?" He fell off a ladder, and the person, "Is your husband conscious?" That interpreter is just what it. Is he awake? Is he awake? And this is eyes open. Is he awake? So conscious isn't going to happen for the deaf that rely on ASL and have tried to learn basic words of your language. Okay, next slide. Again, we've had officers, we've had doctors, we've had fire people say, well, I can mime it out. Hey, sign language has mime in it. It does. If someone says, oh, they were really upset, they were mad. Yeah. I'm going to just write them a note. Remember, sign language has no roots in English. If a person who's deaf depends on ASL, you might as well be writing Russian or something to them. It's not going to happen. And then they can read my lips. because I'm just going to use simple words, but I'm going to pronounce them very clearly. Not happening. So if we also know that there are a lot of 911 operators, when they call an officer or fire department, they will say the person's deaf because they've self-identified and said, and I need an interpreter. Unfortunately, y'all can't go take a Bubba bat and make them do that, so they don't. And so it's very aggravating. I have a picture of a mime. I have a picture of an emergency responder trying to write, and I have a picture of someone who's making a very weird face for lip reading. So let's go to the next slide. You're familiar with the ADA. I think 911 falls under Title IV. But this under the ADA and Title II, any businesses or organization that serve the public, equal access, equal for the person with a disability to that of someone who does not have a disability. So I'm sure you are aware of that. Let's go to the next slide. Right now, I just really want to encourage you to educate your disability community about your 911 and allow your disability community to educate you. You're going to learn so much. And in the same, they will learn so much from you. There's things about 911. They actually, and I'm going to talk about the deaf that I know and the deaf blind that I know personally. And I said this in one, and someone said, well, okay, you watch too much TV. I personally thought that 911 automatically knew where you were. We're good to go. I don't know. Someone says, well, you watch too much TV, and is there something you have to do? Do you have to register? I don't know the answers to these. Neither does your deaf or disability community. Educate them about, no, this isn't how it really works. This is how it works. And let them educate back. You know, how do I get the police to show it with an interpreter? Maybe it's telling them they need to set up with the law enforcement within their areas, but work with them, because they're not going to call you again if that woman is being sex trafficked because she called once before. And yes, the police showed up, but they talked to the man who was trafficking her. Actually, this is a true story. And we couldn't find her again after that. So all of this needs to come together, and whatever's within your purview to change, we're asking you to please help us change this. Next slide. If you're going to do community outreach, talk to us. You can take one of your flyers that you may, I'm sorry, I'm doing this to my screen, that you may be preparing to pass out in the disability community. This flyer without the QR code is only for people who can read and write English. If you have it on the back in Spanish, put a QR code that comes up in voice Spanish for your literacy challenged that may have disabilities. Not, you know, people think, well, you know, this is good enough. No, it's not. Well, you know, they didn't show up because they didn't know. This QR code, and you can put your phone over it, will come up voiced in English. We also can do it in Spanish if you need other languages as well. But it comes up voiced in English. It's also, it can be, if someone blind has their Braille reader attached to it, who is deaf-blind and requires Braille, or they're blind and hard of hearing, this will give them access to this information. You notice on the corner of this flyer, I have an example of this flyer. It's printed in black with white print with yellow sides, strips down the side. We wanted it to be very attention-getting. But we ask that you clip off the right-hand corner and start educating your deaf-blind, your blind community. If that corner is clipped, if you have that clipped corner in your right hand, that's where that QR code is. They should not have to take their phone and go all over each side of that page trying to find a QR code if someone tells it's on there. Make it easy for them to find this and get access to your flyers. If you have any questions about that, reach out to us. Let's go to the next one. Okay, when an emergency happens and they put out text alerts, this population, that isn't going to mean much to them. So people say, well, we tell them to call 211. Well, did you know that 211 is not accessible for people who are deaf all over the nation? It's not a given that it's accessible. Yinter, do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, you're right about that. 211, it is nationwide, that's correct, but it is not accessible. The one thing that would help is if they had a video phone, but you can't text with, or you can't text 211 if you're deaf. And it varies depending on which state you're in, but that is an issue. It's a challenge. And that's something that, we need to keep conscious of. Something else I wanted to add. Now, specifically to 911. Now, if you were to arrive on scene, I need to get some clarification, Yenter. If arrive.
Ooh.
So if you were to arrive there at a deaf-blind person's house, that doesn't mean that they're automatically going to be able to read Braille. And so at that point, you would need to get another interpreter there. And that would be an SSP, a support specialist provider. And they would come and do tactile signing for that person. And that's something to keep in mind, that just because they are blind doesn't mean they have those skills to read in Braille. But that's always something to keep in the back of your mind, that you need to always have another plan, another backup plan for communication. And yeah, that's all. Oh, also, now I'm curious, do any of y'all, let's see, I think it was, 1995, did any of y'all work at 95 or work at 911 prior to 1995? Nobody? Oh, okay. Well, so the reason I mentioned that was because prior to 95, people were predominantly using TTY. And I was just curious if you guys had any experience using that, to know the differences between, it's a slower process. You have to type and wait for a response, and there's lots of errors. And that was just an example that is really evident that, you have to be able to meet somebody's communication needs 100%. And now with video phones, we can meet those needs. And it's been such an improvement for the deaf community and their accessibility.
Okay. Yinter, Kevin, whoops, it just disappeared.
This is Daryl. So that was Karen Marquez. She says 97, and yes, we still use those. The DOJ still requires 911 centers to be able to take TTY calls.
Yes,
So
with my glasses on, you're right, that's Karen. Okay.
And even if people don't use them anymore, the public doesn't use them anymore, a lot of 911 centers are still doing regular training and refresher testing with them.
Right. And I think what Yinter was saying is that not when the 911 person shows up, but whether it's the officer or the fire department or, whoever is a responder, that's one of the challenges that they have. And it never goes well when there's not clear communication when they show up. And real quick, I'm going to give you a true story. And Jeff said, yes, it is still a requirement to have them tested and be sure that they're in work. Yes, thank you. So we'll have you call us through TTY, maybe test. No, I'm kidding. But I want to talk about a lady who called 911 because she had a fire. And she ran out to meet the officer because she couldn't get to her child. And she had come out the back door, and she's deaf and depended totally on sign language. Now, she needed to tell them that her child was not in the bedroom. It was a baby. They were in a bassinet, but they were in the living room, and she couldn't get to them. So she was going she was going to go in herself. Of course, they held her back, and she couldn't communicate. And so they actually restrained her, because not only is she signing, she's grabbing them and trying to, no, let, you know, well, she lost her baby. But something so simple as having an iPad. If there's a deaf, I know time is of the essence when there's a fire, but it's also time of the essence when someone can say, my baby's in the living room. So again, when communication isn't there, the results are devastating. Next slide, please. I want to show you an accessible alert. I don't know if this will play. Can you try and play that, Daryl? This is what it looks like when a deaf person gets it. All they have to do is click on it.
The National Weather Service has issued a tornado warning for your area. Doppler radar observed a developing tornado in your area.
You can pause it, Daryl. That's fine. The text, I keep pointing to my screen. The text under the alert over to the side is Braille accessible. There's when they get the alert, there's a link, and when it comes up, the person who is deaf can just click on it. They don't have to be able to read that link. It's voiced in sign language. It's voiced in sign language. Boy, can y'all hear thunder? I've got thunder coming here, so I better hurry up in case I lose my electricity here. But it's voiced in English, Spanish, however the city, county, state that has this service. And the text is Braille accessible, and it does, you know, it gives access to those who's never had access before to emergency information. Let's go to the next slide, because I've already ran over time. So, yeah, next slide. Yeah. So this is examples of the city of Austin. I'm giving you Texas and Travis County here in Texas. They use this. I want you to know that during COVID, they were even able to put out alerts to say, you know, the transit system here in San Antonio suspended charging. You can ride free because people weren't working. It told them, you know, to go for their shots where they were free, how to get all this information that this segment of our population would have not gotten or struggled to get access to. Let's go to the next slide. Again, that's just showing Harris County. Let's go. They have on their website accessible information, how to prepare a Go kit. All this information is on your website in text. The deaf that depend on ASL, most of them do not own a laptop or a computer in their house. They have that video VP that I was showing that requires connection to the internet, and they have their phone. I don't know if you know this, but that VP didn't cost them any money. It's given to them, that video phone. Their cell phone, most states have a voucher program. They can get that cell phone where we may have paid $700, $800 plus for ours. So they have access to texting you. And that's if right now, if I was deaf and that storm, my electricity shut down and I needed to call 911, I'm going to have to try and text you. So next slide. And again, we're talking about Long Beach, California. We're talking about Oklahoma. This SDG&E is also in California. They are the first utility company that when during a storm, if there's down lines, they send their information to the deaf community as well. If there's rolling brownouts and you have someone that's dependent on having access to electricity for either breathing equipment, whatever it may be, they have that equal access from that utility company. That's so critical, and they're the only ones in the nation doing that right now. Anyway, next slide. This is about DeafLink. We're woman-owned, we're hub certified, and all that great stuff. We're here in Texas. We have a list on here of services we provide, which is our accessible hazard alert system that we're sole source for in the United States. Our accessible video production, which takes any of your videos, make them accessible with caption, voice, sign. We have done this for CDC, for Red Cross, for health districts. The interpreters that work with us are awesome. I have to add that. You go, Trevor. I just gave you a plug. My contact information. My name is Kay Chiodo. It has my phone. My phone number is 210-590-7446. And my email is my name, KAYCHIODO @DeafLink.com. And you can also reach out to Dan Heller, who's the president and knows more technical answers than I do. And I'm done. And I'm sorry I went over time. I guess that means I don't get dessert. But do y'all have any questions?
This is Daryl. Any questions for Kay or for Yenter?
Yeah. Okay.
So this is Daryl. There was one thing I wanted to point out, because you showed several different devices that people who are deaf or hard of hearing or potentially even speech impaired could use to call 911 or to make other types of communication. TTY is the oldest probably of those technologies, and then there's IP captioning telephones and voice-over telephones and the video phones. And to my knowledge, at least the IP caption telephone requires an internet connection. The video phone is probably going to take a broadband connection. And so people who have those needs, who live in rural areas where there might not be very good broadband connectivity yet, they're less likely to use those types of devices. Would you, Yenter, would you say that that's a true statement?
Yes, I agree. And the one exception is if you have satellite internet, that's got 100% reliability. It doesn't matter if there's storms or strong wind. That's the one thing I wanted to let you know.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of people who are deaf do not have that. And I would love to give more examples at some point if we ever get to talk again. But and it's not, the deaf community is so difficult to get those who are dependent on sign language to come forward. We're very blessed here in San Antonio. Our deaf community even works with FEMA. FEMA did a test with them to see how they felt about reading alerts, basically text alerts, and they were like, no, because it'd be like me putting an alert in front of you in sign language. You may think you know something, but did it really apply? Was it exactly what it was? So those are the challenges. And again, 911, in my personal opinion, is one of the most important services out there. And the more you can learn from your deaf blind, your blind community, the better you're going to be. Larry Johnson, again, who's blind, one of our co-workers, he says, I had fallen. I'm blind. I have a guide dog, and they're not aggressive, but I'm sure whoever might have to knock my door down to get to me may not know that. He says, I don't want him to hurt my dog. Don't want him to hurt my dog. There's so many concerns that this community needs to share with y'all. And we really encourage you to have a town hall meeting, have something with interpreters, with tactful interpreters, and get to know your community, your disability community. I don't know if y'all can hear that is horrible. That's thunder and that lightning that's happening here. But thank you so much for allowing me to go on and on and on. And y'all come visit us in Texas. We'll take you down to the Riverwalk. I'm not going to mention Margarita there. We shall. I'm going to say it. So y'all, thank you so much. Have a blessed day and a good weekend.
Thank you, Kay. This is Daryl. Is it okay if I send your presentation out to everybody just so so they can watch those videos?
Please, we would like them not to use it because, as you notice, there's not really a whole lot of words to it as a presentation. But yes, please let them see it and watch those videos. Thank you all very much. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Take care.